When a conclusion is reached, it should stay as the conclusion. If a story's themes, characters, and plot are wrapped up neatly, there's no trouble that will come from keeping it a closed book. There are one too many phenomena where the book is once again opened, injected with words that cause it to stray from the original vision. Unfortunately, Higurashi no Naku Koro ni is also a victim in such an occurrence. 14 years after the visual novel's conclusion, 13 for the anime, Higurashi once again made its return, starting just how it did in the past, with a young boy, Keiichi Maibara, moving into a rural village, where after being acclimated begins to hear of the local rumors, budding suspicion and paranoia. The first episode plays under the guise of a remake, but no more than 20 minutes later is its nature revealed. Following events that happened prior tells the story of Rika, where after she supposedly escaped her hell, is once again subjected to a constant cycle of death within June 1983. But despite having the knowledge to circumvent the oncoming tragedy, her efforts turn out futile. For whatever reason, there's an unforeseen element at play that has taken control of the game board. Like the rest of the When They Cry titles, Go and Sotsu follow a format split in two. The former half approaching questions, while the latter gives answers. Both sides I find to take an odd approach to the story it presents. This is a proper sequel, yet re-explains much of the lore and retreads a majority of previous content. For example, the original Higurashi is split into 8 chapters, Onikakushi, Watanagashi, Tatarigoroshi, etc. Adhering, Go continues the storyline by creating a counterpart arc of those mentioned above, sometimes meshing together both the original's question and answer arc. But sprinkled throughout are minute differences that at some point cause a vast divergence. The problem is, around 50 to 70% of what these new arcs cover is scenes and events that have already been covered. While helpful to those who haven't read or watched the original series in months or years, experiencing one after another can make some parts a drag. I believe this method works well for the first arc, Onidamashi, as it lures the audience into false expectations, before it is hinted at that this is no longer the problem we thought it to be. The 2 preceding question arcs follow suit, but to its detriment. The problem here isn't that it goes through a similar line of events as before. It's that there aren't enough changes to the formula to distinguish itself as a continuation, hampering the intrigue of this new conflict. It is shown that Rika is chained to the past she once escaped. Yet, in this former half of Go, only in scenes far and few is she the focus, instead opting for a passive support role like before. She is the bridge between the past and the present. Even so, the baton is given to Keiichi without acknowledging why he was fit for the role in the first place. He was ignorant of all of his surroundings. It allowed the viewer to learn of his terror and get a first-hand experience of what he perceived. It gave us a vessel to self-insert, questioning the plethora of inexplicable things happening. At this point in the story, however, we should be familiar with most of Hinamizawa's mysteries. The endemic syndrome, its symptoms, how they arise, and the cause for Rika's loops. So the questions it tries to bring up don't carry the same weight. It's wrong to say that Go is bereft of mystery. There is a good balance of subtle to obvious clues dropped that provoke thought. Personally, however, I just couldn't find myself interested. It could have been the overbearing recaps and loose continuity, or maybe it was because I was spoiled on a major plot point. But no matter how I looked at it, I felt something missing, leaving a feeling of needlessness. What was the point in seeing Rika and her friends fight tooth and nail in order to achieve their happy end, just to have it all reset? There was nothing to anchor me to this new plot, but the characters' antics were my solace. All the main cast were just as fun to watch as I remembered. Some remain stagnant for the moment, while others are expanded upon. This especially goes for Rika. Seeing hopelessness grasp her heart as she is thrust into torment, knowing her work and courage have been reduced to nothing. It was genuinely heart-wrenching when the spotlight was cast on her, but it was that light that kept me going to the end. To what Higurashi is known for, the horror. The art, though bubbly and cute, is malleable to fit the situation. Used in synergy with effects, allow for a shift in tone without ending up jarring. In tune with the soundtrack and shot composition, chills are certainly sent. It has a stable base to build off of, albeit coming off short in substance. Its method to terror is simple, to catch you off guard. The turning point is often abrupt. It leaves you exposed as you cross-reference your previous knowledge, having you ask, is this how it went before? Until not a minute later, you will have your answer. Out of nowhere, it hits you. An approach antithetical to how these segments were handled prior. As seconds pass, the air from the window ajar begins to span the room. Sitting in the center, though eerie, seems enough to ignore. It's not until the room is filled, marinated in the flow of events, does the air rear its macabre head. This is an approach that many, myself included, loved about Higurashi's horror. It enveloped you in the mist long before the major event happened. It's the knowledge that something will happen, but you don't know exactly what. The story takes its time to set expectations for how horribly it will end, but what transpires is usually worse than you could imagine. In contrast, Go's method has build up and execution all happening in under a minute. It doesn't help that the cheapness of it all is exacerbated by the reliance on excessive gore, spewing out as an overt demand for a squeamish reaction. By the second or third time a scene of this nature occurred, it began to have the opposite effect on me. A single wound coating the victim's surroundings in blood just comes off as silly. Almost as if the show is aware its tension is subpar and uses exaggerated quantities of blood to supplement where it's lacking. The thrill is simply not the same, but where these moments end off is phenomenal. The epilogue of each arc rings home the severity of the trauma endured. Sometimes a line is thrown out that shakes up all you have known, carrying into the next with expectation. Through many complaints, the ending points were satisfactory. I just wish they would have been the cherry on top instead of the highlights. I didn't find much consistent intrigue until episode 14. At which point breaks its relationship with the old arcs, providing mostly original material. It's at this point that is definitely the most interesting. Although some aforementioned problems persist, the new stakes and perspective shift convey the final stages of rising action. With perplexity at its peak, here at the end of this arc, answers will bring all pieces into belonging, and maybe the truth will make all before it shine. Before that, however, I want to say I enjoyed Go as I was watching it, revisiting the characters, seeing the different sides to them as the respective chapter progressed, and seeing the subtle clues form a new mystery. Though there was plenty I disliked, I wouldn't say I held contempt for it. I was spoiled who the mastermind was, which probably took a bit of entertainment away, but I was still curious how this would all tie together. So, why the mostly negative tone I've held, you might ask? Well, it all comes down to the taste of how and why. While it was a feast conceptually, the actual substance of the meal somehow left me more empty than before, as the veil was lifted, recontextualizing the past upon its wake. The joy I once felt for it drained. When it all came together, it wasn't an enthusiastic eureka. All that came was a sigh, followed by the despondent question of, really? That's it? The delivery for both the conflict's origin and the blanks that are filled in can be simplified in a sentence. Great potential that was strung by unnatural and contrived happenings. Although the strife's core is natural, surely to befall many people of adolescence as they grow, partaking in wants to form their identities that may come into conflict with those close to them. It's a relatable theme that unfortunately comes at the cost of uncharacteristic actions that feed into one another. While it could have expanded upon that moral by diving deep into the loosening bond, there wasn't enough time put into the mindset to justify either party's actions, creating both a protagonist and antagonist I couldn't root for. Their actions didn't feel natural to them, only to the plot they were a part of. They needed to do X so Y could happen, but instead of running along the track of their established character, decides to run across the field to make it to the finish line quicker. By doing so, takes one of the main themes of Higurashi, how you should speak up about your troubles with those you trust most to work together towards a resolution. It's a theme that is the pinnacle of many character arcs and disregards it. Talking is the best way this conflict could have been resolved, and since those involved learn to rely on others in times of need, it feels disconnected to their true character. This is especially true for the antagonist, bearing understandable hatred, but it's the extent to which they act upon their emotions that make it unbelievable. Even considering their emotional weaknesses and the pain suffered, the path they take feels too much of a stretch, creating a motive that takes a jump in logic so great that defies any thought put into it. Their plan doesn't only come out of nowhere, but it is also counterintuitive to the goal they try to achieve. This final quarter of goal, the truth behind the conflict, killed all of my interest, retroactively stripping any amusement I'd found. That is, except for one subplot, which is surprisingly the redemption of Teppei Hojo, a rightfully hated man who comes to his senses, realizing what a despicable mess he is, attempts to make amends in spite of his irredeemable actions. It re-established the message of how no matter the deeds one committed, they deserve a chance to reform. The general idea is a great way to continue the story of our beloved characters, but it is the execution that makes this conflict feel empty, becoming even more prominent as it goes back to explain. Sotsu starts at 0, revisiting the arcs from Goal with differing perspectives, giving a peek behind the curtains of how this play was arranged. Once again, the same scenes are replayed, although shortened and containing a perspective shift every now and then to reveal what was once hidden. However, this new point of view was nowhere near enough to entice me, as, from backstage, you can really see how sloppily put together the plot is. Sotsu's job is to give information to fill in the blanks left by the mystery of Goal. In doing so, not only gives the impression that Goal is redundant, but also shows how carelessly the holes were filled in. Many plot threads are being interwoven to create this story. However, the allotted time does not allow them to be tied together naturally. Story beats appear then vanish. It gives answers that, while are interesting in theory, are churned half thought out. Then when it does have an interesting subplot, it is usually left hanging. It doesn't help that this is all put together by the surface level traits of Higurashi. Very little depth is given to the gears that operate Go and Sotsu's mystery. Hinamizawa syndrome plays a big role, but what is shown is stuff that we've already experienced without a spin on it. A spin that should be there given these new circumstances. Characters oftentimes fall into a stereotype of themselves without the subtlety that makes them who they are, forming an amalgamation of bland Higurashi staples. What made Go interesting was that there was hope. that all of the odd story beats and questionable direction could be made up for with satisfying answers to make it coherent. However, Sotsu put the nail in the coffin, not only solidifying how barren it is, but also shows what could have been. At its core, Higurashi Go in Sotsu is about friends whose paths cause them to drift apart. But in its attempt to branch and connect to the greater When They Cry series, fell flat when attending to itself. The ideas it brings were brilliant in concept, and it's the epilogue that made it all apparent. The message it's been trying to send and the meaning behind all of these bizarre occurrences. The final 10 minutes somehow ties together all of the lacking threads into a nice bow, not changing or giving new insight on the past, but carries high emotional value to place a charming filter over the questionable direction for the past 38.5 episodes. It was a surprising touch given all that happened in the climax, and most importantly, shows that all of these ideas could have worked if the mystery was presented differently, if the plot threads connected naturally, if character development was consistent, if a certain twist was built up more to fit right in with what the story tried to connect to, if more time was dedicated to realizing all of this in a coherent and satisfying manner, it very well could have been a cherished piece. Higurashi Go in Sotsu is a perfect sequel in concept that fell short in bringing all of its ideas together. I know this is a bit more negative than my usual content, and while I would much rather make something with the opposite tone, this was one of those exceptions. I had so many thoughts swirling that I had to talk about it. When They Cry is a series close to my heart, and seeing an entry miss its potential is just saddening to see, especially considering what this particular story set out to do. Although the manga adaptation, Go and Meguri, does seem promising. I may make a video on that as well at some point. Also, I don't mean to turn you away if you haven't watched Higurashi Go yet. After all I've said, I still believe you should watch it for yourself, and hopefully, you will get something out of it that I could not. If you enjoyed Go and Sotsu, I'm interested to see why. I would love to get a differing perspective on some of its good qualities that I couldn't see. And with that, I hope you enjoyed. Thank you very much for watching. Later.